Oh, good evening. I'm a bit worried now that it might be downhill all the way from that, but thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So my question, does it pay to be different? Let me start with the good news. I really think it's very hard nowadays to find a chief executive who wouldn't say that diversity is incredibly important to their business. Often they make it one of their top 3 things that they want to do to improve the diversity in the business that they run during their time as CEO. Often they will say they're passionate about the topic. And to be honest, I think they are passionate about it. They do believe in it. They might have daughters. They have come to see the benefits of diversity. Now, of course, when people talk about the good news first, then often there's bad news to follow. And this is no exception. The bad news is that a lot of the people in their own organizations may not actually behave as if they really believe that diversity pays, that it is a valuable skill or characteristic of teams in their business. I came across this cartoon recently. I hope, now which way around is it? Let's get it right. Down, right, came across this cartoon recently. I hope you can see it from the back, but I'll explain what it is if you can't. So it summarizes it so much more eloquently than words could. There's a row of men that look like sort of the Agent Smith from The Matrix there, interviewing what seems to be an ethnic minority woman. I love the guy on the right, actually my right, yes, the left far away. He looks like he's about to fall off his chair. He's so bored of the whole procedures. And he's asking her, describe what you bring to this company. Now, of course, it's laughable. In fact, I did post this on Twitter, and someone called me out. They said, oh, you're making a big assumption. She might be interviewing them, which I thought was a lovely twist on it. And of course, I would love that to be true. But I'm afraid I think that was probably not what the cartoonist was thinking. The reality is, say in business, many people are behaving as if they still think of diversity as something more to do with political correctness, about being nice to people, really, rather than that actually somebody might bring something new, some creativity, to cite Stephen's word, to the table. Now, I don't want you to be in any way despondent about this bad news thing. I'm just telling it as it is. I'm actually incredibly optimistic. I think that we stand on the brink of a real rethink about the value that diversity brings to the characteristics we've already heard talk about today, innovation and creativity, characteristics of business that are becoming ever more valuable in a world where we can see artificial intelligence doing all the other work for us. Now, my optimism is not based on sort of wishful thinking. It's based on actual experience. When we had the financial crisis, almost a decade ago to the day, clearly it was a cataclysmic disaster, but one of the very small, I'm certainly not saying it was worth having because of what happened next, but one of the small silver linings was that, of course, there was a moment of humility in particularly the financial sector. It was obvious that we couldn't carry on as before, that actually the thinking that had led to the financial crisis couldn't possibly get us out of it, that we needed new thinking. It wasn't an optional extra. This is a quote from a man who's already been quoted today, seems fitting. We can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Now, for me personally, this was a bit of an opportunity. It was a moment to seize, because I had been working very unsuccessfully under a gender diversity initiative. The financial sector is very male-dominated still, often very sort of traditionally educated men. I think we get a bit of a harder image than we really deserve these days, but actually 10 years ago that was certainly the case. It was quite hard as a woman even just to break in to the upper echelons of the industry. But I say we had this opportunity that things couldn't go on the way they were. So I set up something called the 30% Club, which was set up in 2010. So initial aftermath of the global financial crisis, obviously the most important thing was to shore up the financial system. And then as the dust settled, people looked at what happened at, for example, Royal Bank of Scotland, and actually the regulator cited groupthink as one of the major causes of the financial crisis, of their failure. It's a bit of it sounds like an urban legend, but their board at the time of the ill-fated ABN AMRO acquisition that really was the downfall of the company was 18 people, which is far too big for a board. 17 of them were men, and most of them had seemed to have grown up in the same street in Edinburgh. If you Google it, it's like kind of spot the difference kind of contest. I have nothing against people from Edinburgh, by the way. It's just that if you have 17 out of 18 of them, then it's not necessarily the best group of people. People didn't challenge each other. So what happened next was very interesting, and to say it's not wishful thinking. this is what happened to the percentage of women on boards. Now, I'm not cheating here. We started here in 2010 when 12.5% of the country's top 100 boards were women. Now, I put it on further just to show you how slow the improvement had been in the previous 20 years. And then since then, in fact, great news, and what wonderful timing that you asked me to speak today, because actually last week we got through 30%. I had to make it happen. I had to get my friends to apply to boards. No, but we seriously, we got to 30.4%. And actually, although that sounds like, well, it's a very narrow achievement, it's only the boardroom, it's not all women in society by any stretch of the imagination, this was quite difficult. There was a massive hostility to the whole concept. There were some wonderful people who got behind the campaign initially, right from the start. But the members of the 30% Club are mostly men. And that was the thing that made quite a difference. When we started, 99 out of 100 FTSE chairmen were men. So we needed the men. These were their boardrooms. They were the ones that had the power. But it was achieved definitely by, to be honest, a lot of the women involved worked extremely hard. They weren't the formal members of the club, but they did a lot of the work stream activities, a lot of the work with something like the search firms that were getting the candidate lists together. It was a collaborative effort. And in lots of ways, the diversity of the people working towards it achieved that great result. We had a collaboration between government and the private sector. We had a collaboration, say, between men and women, and we had a collaboration between lots of really generous women. So it's given me confidence that change is possible. Often when you've got lots and lots of people taking small steps in the same direction, you can make a real difference. But the motivation for me wasn't, to be honest, just about sort of gender equality for its own sake. It was about improving the thinking. Now this headline in particular, what makes a team smarter, more women, might upset the men in the room, but it's not intended to. This was an experiment, or set of experiments, and the title of piece of work that you can find if you look up Harvard Business Review. 2 professors, for what it's worth, 1 man and 1 woman, conducted experiments to see if you could have any predictive qualities around how groups behave, whether you could improve the collective intelligence of people in certain ways. We have IQ tests for individuals, and they were looking to see if there was anything similar for groups. And what they found, and they weren't expecting this result, that actually it didn't matter if you had high IQ people or lower IQ people, the results when they had sort of puzzles to solve weren't that different. It was the gender balance that changed things. That actually, particularly if you had single-sex groups, actually could be all men or all women, actually neither extreme was good, of high IQ people, they didn't interact in the same productive way that when you had mixed groups. And they disbelieved the results, actually, and run the experiment again, just to check that this was actually a finding. And actually, of course, it would please me greatly, but I realize I'm a little bit biased. They had to keep adding in women, as it were, till they got to 70% women before they kind of peaked. But that's sort of by the by. So the point was that the whole point was making thinking better. Now, I'm honest enough to say that that wasn't necessarily everybody else's motivation when they got behind the 30% Club campaign. I think they were doing it sometimes because they felt a lot of pressure, they felt a lot of social pressure, a lot of pressure from the media. So again, being honest, I think that in lots of ways what we've done is slightly hide the fact that we haven't really changed the thinking. I've now come to see that actually we've had more of a thin veneer of change, and that actually it's incredibly difficult to get people to even relate to people that they disagree with. We like to surround ourselves with people who agree with us. There is this echo chamber phenomenon. Now, this has nothing to do with gender equality. These are pictorial versions of conversations on Twitter about climate change issues. And the green blobs are the people who not just believe in climate change as a phenomena, but they are activists. They're trying to prevent it getting worse. The red blobs are the skeptics of the whole issue, and whatever the topic of the conversation around this, and the far right one is around whether people are responsible for climate change. We have the greens talking to each other, and we have the reds talking to each other. And it's incredibly difficult, this is just my source here, Science Direct, but most users interact only with like-minded others. And I have found that in so many aspects of my life, really, that actually it's really hard. You know, when you make friends with people, you don't tend to make friends with people who will disagree with you. And that is what I think we're still up against. But what is starting to happen now in business, I think, and it's partly because of so much of the political pressure people feel, that there's a need, a recognition that we need to listen more to each other. There's also, of course, as we've heard already today, the growing use of technology to do lots of the jobs that actually can be done by machines. And so there's much more focus on the need to harness creativity amongst people. So I've just shown a couple of empirical examples, in fact, some of it's survey. There is a realization on the left, we've got ethnic and cultural diversity, that there's a third improvement in results. We've got 82% respondents, 82% of response in a survey of business people believing that diversity develops new products. And then not just for kind of existing customers or for new customers, a realization by half of the people surveyed that actually this is good for all of the customers. So there's a kind of realization, albeit belatedly, that actually this is important for businesses. To be honest, even more so, I think people are realizing that there is this link between creativity. There's lots of data as well showing actually if you have more women in the boardroom or in senior leadership teams, to better gender balance, that you'll get better results. A recent survey showing that actually investment performance is better when you have gender balanced teams. Unfortunately, there are still very few of them. But this is sort of where you come in. I believe that the realization is growing that diversity is not a problem in business, it's part of the solution to lots of the other problems that we have. So I'm going to conclude as well with a bit of advice, and that is to not submerge your differences, because it would be one of the things that's quite dangerous, I think, is people often have programs around attracting diverse talent, but when people arrive, they try to fit in. They try to submerge their differences, they try to get a seat at the existing table. My own career was a complete failure in the first iteration. I didn't get the promotion at my very first job when I should have done, and a lot of the time I realise now it was partly because I was leaning in very hard to the existing situation. I wasn't being bold enough, I wasn't being brave enough, I wasn't being creative enough, as we've heard already, so important. So I did use this because I get called a Superwoman or Wonder Woman, slightly mockingly, because I don't particularly like the tagline. I think that all women are Wonder Women. We've all got something to offer. But of course, I'm not excluding the men in the room too, and actually you can fly as well, so really. But I can't emphasize this enough. We've already heard the talks today have sort of built up to this point, really, how creativity is really going to be, people talk about data being the new oil. Creativity is the new thing that businesses really, really crave. They can have lots of people replaced by robots or by some form of artificial intelligence, but the design elements, the creative things, finding solutions to problems that have gripped us for many decades and will continue are the real things. So it is a dawning realization. I am not saying it's all fixed. I'm not saying the world is completely equal, but I am asking you, as you look into what you might do in your careers, to recognize that you bring something special to the table, and the most valuable asset that you have is being you. Thank you.